Good evening. Welcome to our special meeting of council for September 7th, 2023. Bonjour et bienvenue à notre réunion spéciale en 7 septembre. I would like to open this meeting with taking any declarations of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. Next up, we'll adopt the agenda.
It is moved by Councillor Restoul and seconded by Councillor Tessier. Be it resolved that the agenda for the special council meeting held on September the 7th, 2023 be adopted as presented.
Questions or comments? All in favor? Carried. We'll move on to the meat of this evening's meeting. This evening, we are pleased to welcome a delegation from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. With us this evening, we have Kathy Horgan, Manager, Local Government and Housing for the Northern Municipal Services Office, Brian Searle, Senior Municipal Finance Advisor for the Northern Municipal Services Office, and Sarah Cormier, Municipal Advisor for the Northern Municipal Services Office. The delegation this evening stems from an order issued by previous Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, on April 28th, 2022 in intervention in the affairs of the previous council. And part of his order at that time would be that the ministry would be undertaking a full review of the municipality's policies, practices, and procedures to see where those could be improved to improve the functioning of the municipality. At this time, the review has been completed and our guests are here this evening to present their findings. So I'd like to welcome first Ms. Kathy Horgan.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Council, for having us here tonight. So as the Mayor indicated, we're here to present the findings of the report that that the Ministry undertook in summer and into the fall of 2022. The report does speak to what precipitated the result of the review, and it's clear in the report there were some issues previous to April 2022 and stemming from some council strife, I guess you could say, and then council's inability to fill a council vacancy. So as a result of that, calls from the public and discussions with the minister had made that decision to order the municipality to work with a facilitator that the ministry chose to fill a council vacancy. That happened. That occurred last year. And then as part of that, as the mayor indicated, as part of that, it was to conduct a review. Our staff came in, had a look at what policies and procedures that the municipality had in place, and we reviewed them, compared them to other policies. Brian will get more into that, and then we have the report and recommendations. So we do have a very short deck that we'll speak to. First slide, anybody who's attended a ministry presentation will see our disclaimer slide. So we're not lawyers, but just want to say that anything contained in the slide deck is not intended to be legal advice. So we're going to go to the next slide. So again, as some background, I kind of spoke to that a little bit already. There was a letter issued April 25th by the minister that directed this review. So I would like to, at this point in time, thank municipal staff. So Jay Barbeau, Melanie Ducharme, and Alyssa Craddock. They were instrumental in working with Brian in our office and ministry staff in conducting the review. So I just want to thank them for their cooperation and assistance throughout the entire review. So thanks for that. So the review process that was undertaken, so the ministry obtained copies of various administrative policies, and Brian's going to talk to those. We looked at administrative policies, practices, and procedures, whether they were in writing or not. We compared those to similar policies from other municipalities, so similar size and sometimes even larger, because sometimes even larger municipalities can their policies can still be transferable to smaller ones. So we did look at that. Ministry staff met with municipal staff in July of 2022, and there was back and forth after that. And then following that, there was the drafting of the report, including all of the recommendations, and then working its way through our approval process within the ministry. The minister released the report on July 11th, 2023, and we're here tonight to present the findings, share with you what is in the report, and then after Brian does that, we have a slide on next steps that we'll talk about and kind of what we'd like to see going forward. And then we'll end it from there. So right now I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, worship members of council, for making time for us to meet with you tonight. Generally, throughout the 2018 to 2022 term of office, West Nipissing Council struggled with council and council staff, council to council and council staff relations. On July 21st, 2020, the ward's 7th seat became vacant, and from that time forward, council struggled with increasing number of deadlocks and the inability to move business forward. Ministry of Municipal Affairs at the time, Steve Clark, sent out letters to the mayor on January 4th and January 26th, expressing concern, which ultimately resulted in the April 25th order directing the review, which we're going to go over tonight, but also the appointment of the facilitator, which ultimately led to the council staff or council vacancy policy and the breaking of the deadlock for the balance of the term. Looking at the review, which I believe you should all have copies of, the objective of the review, it's important to note, is on the administrative practices and procedures, but it was focused on the mandatory policies required under the Municipal Act, and as well as those policies which would largely be responsive to the issues facing council and staff at the time. So the list of policies that you'll see on page 3 of the report is not a total list of all the policies, of course, a municipality should have, but was rather those policies which were felt to be responsive, which were either mandated or which were responsive to the issues which were going on and facing council at the time. I did meet with the CAO, Director of Corporate Services, and the clerk on July 6th, 2022, and received materials from them prior to that time and after that time, and thank them very much for their input and information and assistance in the conduct of the review. There are 41 recommendations, and I do not intend to go over each individual recommendation. In many cases, the recommendations stem from the same basic difficulties. And I think that just looking at a few of the recommendations and bringing attention to those which were most problematic might be most beneficial for the time we have. So if we look at policy 1, the code of conduct, every municipality in Ontario is required to have a code of conduct, and the codes of conduct are required to include prescribed subject matters under Ontario Regulation 55 of 18. Your code of conduct for council and for boards and committees was available on the municipal website and included everything that needed to be included and was consistent with the form of codes of conduct used by other municipalities in Northern Ontario. The principal problem, of course, was that notwithstanding the code of conduct, some members of council in the last term, so when I talk about members of council, I'm not referring to the people here present tonight, we're talking about council in the last term, they continue to engage in behaviors that may have been inconsistent with this bylaw and in fact resulted in some complaints to the Integrity Commissioner as a result of those behaviors. The suggestion, of course, is that detailed training on the code of conduct, including the conflict resolution, may have had some assistance had it been done really early in the term before issues came to a head, and perhaps if it had had the opportunity to be repeated before the resignation of the Ward 7 councillor, and perhaps stopped that resignation. But again, you can bring all the training in the world, and it is not going to change, unfortunately, some individuals' behaviors. The procedure bylaw itself, that you will see there are a number of recommendations with respect to the procedure bylaw. A lot of them come down to updating it, and I understand it has been updated since the investigation was undertaken. But the encouragement is to use plain language and to ensure that everything within the procedure bylaw reflects the current practices of council. Or looking at procedure recommendation 2.2, looking at the policy itself and assess if it meets the needs of council as it stands, and ensure that you regularly review it to keep it consistent with the way you are doing things, or amending the bylaw to reflect the way you would like things done. Alternatively, if you're content with it, you need to make sure that you continue to adhere to the practices outlined in the procedure bylaw. Skipping ahead slightly to recommendation 2.5, one of the issues that came up from time to time in meetings that were observed by ministry staff that attended was that it was unclear on how the presiding officer was to exercise some of the powers identified in the procedural bylaw, and particularly how they were exercised during electronic meetings where the chair did not have control over the operation of the electronic platform. And it is encouraged that you think about addressing that so that you have a clear statement of authority on what can be done and what cannot be done, and how that can be exercised, including during any electronic meetings, in the event that you wish to proceed with those, to allow members to proceed. We're talking about members of council attending and participating in the meeting electronically, not simply broadcasting out to the public on an electronic platform. Another issue which was raised, and which quite frankly has been raised even before the term of last council, is the occasional release of closed meeting or confidential information by persons having had access to it at a closed meeting. So if we look at recommendation 2.6, one of the recommendations is to make sure that all closed meeting minutes, documents, and associated emails are marked clearly and perhaps watermarked confidential, and that you consider implementing a sensitivity restriction on emails containing documents related to closed sessions or other confidential material, including restrictions that limit the ability of persons receiving those to forward an intelligible version of any attachments. And there are different electronic security platforms such as Office 365 or McAfee or any of the other security platforms which allow you to embed password protections, including not only password to actually view the document, but passwords to be able to forward an intelligible copy of that document. So you would not be able to forward the actual document in a way that would be readable by another computer. And that may limit, I don't know that you can ever entirely eliminate when someone can see a document in the computer, whether they can take a picture with their phone or something, but at least it stops them from, it makes it as difficult as possible for people to circulate information from closed meetings. The other thing is to amend the procedure bylaw to include restrictions on disclosing or distributing documents received in preparation for, during, or in relation to closed sessions. And I understand that may have been done in the most recent amendments to your procedure bylaw. Additionally, and in the same vein, if we jump ahead to recommendation 213, it's recommended that the municipality consider extending the ban on circulating closed meeting minutes to any member who has declared a pecuniary interest in the subject matter dealt with at the closed session, with such a ban essentially extending to those items in which the declared pecuniary interest was made. So if I had a matter on the closed agenda, as you're aware, a council member having that must declare it, must stand up and leave the meeting during the portion of that time that is discussed in closed session, and may return for the balance of a closed session meeting if there are other items on the closed meeting agenda. So in this case, it would ban that individual from being able to look at the portion of the closed meeting minutes that dealt with any section on which they had declared a pecuniary interest. And they would receive a copy of the minutes that would be redacted simply for the part that they were out of the meeting. Continuing to move ahead, if we look at recommendation 215, one of the issues which the last council struggled with from time to time during the meeting session was a disagreement on how the rules of debate were being implemented and applied. And again, I suggest that there should be training for council on the rules of debate, specifically that are included within your procedural bylaw. And one of the other recommendations in the report is to consider implementing a flow chart, which would be similar to that if you look online for any of the Robert's Rules of Orders flow charts. So it is easy to see the kind of motion that you want to do, whether it can interrupt another motion, whether it can be debated, and so forth. Because in a number of the meetings that had occurred, when those issues came up, there was a lot of debate about how those rules of debate were implemented and whether they were being appropriately done. Moving ahead then to out of the procedure bylaw itself, although there are other recommendations, those are the ones I wanted to highlight. Looking at the mandatory policies, council staff relations policy, you have a council staff relations policy. It is, at the time of the review, it was fairly current, having been passed in 2019. And again, it was suggested that, recommended that training on the code of conduct and council staff relations policy implemented and repeated at any time at which you think that there is going to be an issue which might result in a council member leaving, and hopefully stop them from leaving if council can be encouraged to return to a decorum of behavior. Looking at the delegation policy, it is recommended that you adopt a comprehensive delegation of authority bylaw that is required under section 270. That way members of the public, council, and staff can easily locate and understand where the authority for various decisions at various levels lie. In conjunction with that, it was recommended that you undertake a general review of policies, programs, and practices to determine if there are other delegations of council authority that could be made. Particularly, it was noted that council was often during the 2018 to 2022 term taking up a lot of its time on relatively minor matters, noise bylaw variations, minor variance applications, and so forth, which often got delayed, put over from council meeting to council meeting because council was unable to finish its meeting. So frankly, looking at those and determining to what extent you're willing to allow staff just to make routine, simple decisions on these matters would be helpful to free up council time to deal with more important, difficult issues that are of strategic importance with greater impact across the community, and enable the council to determine the business identified on its agendas in a timely manner, but also allow simple matters to be dealt with expeditiously and without individuals in the community having to wait for council approval for very minor matters. The other thing, which is not in the main report, but is included in the appendices to the report, which I would bring to your attention because it is under section 270 a required policy, is to adopt a tree canopy and natural vegetation bylaw so that you are in compliance with the policy requirements of section 270 of the Municipal Act. Moving to other policies, one of the recommendations obviously in the report was to adopt a council vacancy policy, which you have done. So I'm not really going to get into that. Another issue, though, coming back to the question, as I mentioned earlier in the procedure bylaw about dealing with confidential information, is that the municipality may want to consider implementing a clear policy outlining when it is appropriate for council to access information that may have privacy rights associated with it. So whether council is going to access information about individual projects that are going on and information behind bids that they're receiving, or staff information, employment records, what have you. When is it appropriate that council accesses those, and when is it not? And you should also introduce privacy settings not only on emails circulating closed minutes material, but generally you should consider implementing privacy settings on emails and documents to restrict the communication and distribution of information as you feel appropriate. So on most modern email programs, you can set sensitivities of low, medium, or high, which restricts the ability of people to send it and forward it and to copy it without restriction. So not only in the context of closed meeting information, but generally in respect of other information which you may have received outside of the closed meeting. For example, drafts of bylaws or reports before they are presented to the public, things like that. You may want to think about implementing a restriction on how you're accessing those. And in fact, there's an example of those kinds of policies in the link within the report from the City of Toronto in that case. Communications or social media. One of the principal problems that was facing West Nipissing in the last term of council was the effect of social media and some lack of decorum, professionalism, and in fact, probably a rather aggressive trolling behavior that could be seen on those platforms. So it is suggested and recommended to the municipality that you adopt a social media policy that applies to council members and staff, that you amend your code of conduct to council staff relations policy and harassment policy to stipulate that appropriate decorum, professionalism when dealing with municipal matters should be maintained by all members of council and staff, and that you should actively provide support to members of staff and council subjected to the publication of misleading information or misinformation and or trolling behaviors on social media by firstly having West Nipissing administration and council make clear statements, setting out correct information in a timely fashion, and provide council members and staff access to legal counsel, social media consultants, and other supports to develop an appropriate response where the behavior involves trolling, which results in emotional or mental distress to the council member or staff. The next recommendation talks about complaints policies. As part of the investigation, we did look at complaints which had been made on social media, and one of the complaints was that when complaints were made, no one, they fell into a black hole and no one heard about it, whether true or not. When we talked about the complaints policy, it was indicated that there were no specific timelines for acknowledging the report within so many days and reporting back to the individual on what steps had been taken with respect to their complaint, and that was sort of expected of the department heads, but was not in writing as such. So it is suggested that you in fact put that policy in writing so that individuals have an understanding that their complaint has been heard and what steps, if any, because obviously in some cases there's nothing you can do about the complaint, but at least that the complaint has been heard and a response is received within a specific time frame be identified. And again, examples are included within this report. Council appointments. There was no clear, at the time of the investigation, there was no clear policy on how council appointments were being conducted by the council for West Nipissing. So how you determine which council members are on committees, how you appoint them to committees, how you remove them from committees. And it is suggested that you adopt an appropriate appointment policy, which falls within or recognizes your local preference for how that is done. And there's an example of a policy attached or embedded. Harassment policies. Again, one of the principal problems in the last election, during the last council's term, was that the relationships between council and staff deteriorated to the extent that staff stopped attending meetings, and municipal affairs staff had to sit in to observe meetings in an effort to encourage decorum to continue to be met during meetings and not to have staff being abused at meetings. And that it is our understanding from the review that that behavior extended to instances outside of council meetings where staff were harassed in the workplace and elsewhere by council members. So it is rather a number of recommendations with respect to that. So the first was to expand the training process for workplace safety outlined in the harassment policy to specifically include members of council. To review the harassment policy and ensure that there are clear expected timelines for each step of the complaint resolution. So a person who complains of harassment can understand that their harassment complaint will be heard within a certain period of time, and it will advance according to a given time frame. So they're not left hanging, waiting for council to say, oh, we're not meeting on that today. Oh, we're not meeting on that today. Because in numerous instances observed by staff during their attendance at the meetings, when closed meeting sessions were asked to be held to deal with specifically harassment complaint issues, those meeting requests were denied, and the harassment request sat, or the report on the harassment complaint sat. The harassment policy should be adopted by bylaw, so it is a bylaw of the municipality and not simply a HR policy. The harassment policy should be extended to include council within the policy. Again, you may want to consider extending the workplace policy, harassment policy, to include restrictions related to statements made in the media and on social media where they are misleading, spread misinformation, or involve trolling behaviors that may cause emotional or mental distress for council members or staff members. And of course, clearly those harassment policies would be directed primarily at staff and council making comments about each other, but can also involve perhaps members of the community making statements about staff or council members, and being able then to allow people subject to that harassment to access supports from the municipality, which could include making clear statements, setting up correct information to combat misleading and misinformation as timely as possible, and to receive supports from the municipality, such as access to legal counsel, social media consultants, to develop appropriate responses where the behavior involves the spreading of misleading or misinformation or trolling, and may include other assistance for emotional or mental distress. To review the existing reports and recommendations made by the investigator, and my understanding is that those were done by this term of council already. The next thing to talk about is Integrity Commissioner Service Guidelines. During the last term of council, a number of complaints were made to the Integrity Commissioner and unfortunately sat undealt with for a period of time. They were rather lengthily left in the hands of the Integrity Commissioner without a clear set of timelines within which that should have been actioned. So it is recommended that you establish a service standard for the Integrity Commissioner that includes specified timelines for acknowledgement of the receipt, for the commencement of the investigation, and general timelines for the interim and final reports, so that you know that that's going to occur within a certain period of time relative to the merit, relative to the seriousness, obviously, of the report. Service standards policy. So one of the other things that we looked at was whether there was a formal written service standards for the way in which staff is to provide services to the community. With recent staff changeovers, rendering a standard in writing may help reduce criticism of staff and ensure that staff, council, and the public have the same expectation of staff's performance. And again, there's an example of a municipal service standards policy embedded in the document. Council and staff training policy. Well, there was an informal kind of policy on how council and some staff would receive training. It is suggested that you adopt a written training policy, for council and staff members, including training on all mandatory policies and those policies which tend to improve council and council staff and public relations, and which promote accountability and transparency in the community. It is suggested that you extend council and staff member training to include at a minimum social media, workplace harassment, council staff relations, code of conduct, and confidential information. So those are the main aspects of the report that I wanted to go over. If there are questions at this point about any specific recommendations within the report, or any of the matters that I've talked about, or how the report was conducted, or the investigation was conducted, I'm prepared to speak to those now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Searle. I'll just, for the record, we're going to treat this as a regular delegation, just so council is aware of the next steps and how we're going to proceed. Any questions that you have towards ministry staff in regards to the report, the recommendations made, we're going to take those questions now on the floor. This report, along with a staff report that outlines the steps, like the recommendations against the steps that we've already taken and where we still have some action to do, will come back at the next general government meeting on October 10th for us as a council to fully discuss the report, and then also have that kind of comparison document, because we do know that we have taken several of the steps already that have been recommended, as Mr. Searle pointed out, with a seat vacancy policy and with the updating of our social media policy. So this will give staff a little bit more opportunity to kind of do the back and forth between what we've done and what we still need to do to meet the industry's expectations here. So with that, I would open the floor to any questions you have on any of the specific recommendations in the report. If you want me to break the ice, I'll start off. Okay, I did have, I will start if that makes everybody feel a little bit more comfortable. Sorry, I had notes here. I'm sorry. I can't remember my own questions now. I'd have to go through my notes. Anybody else? Thank you, Councillor Pellerin.
Yes, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure to who I direct that question. Okay. on page 20, it says that the Municipal Act of 2001 requires council to take action to fill the vacancy within 60 days. Okay. Who is in to enforce that? I assume it's your ministry. And why didn't you step in sooner?
Oh,
Open to you.
I could, okay. So the municipal act does require that council follow that. There are no, the council fill the vacancy or make a decision either to appoint someone or pass a bylaw, ordering a by-election within 60 days. So, but there are no provisions in the municipal act to allow the ministry to intervene at that point. So if there's an issue and the public is not happy that council is failing to fill a vacancy within 60 days, then they can challenge, the public can challenge the municipality in court. But there are no provisions in the municipal act for the ministry to intervene at that point. Where the ministry or the minister can intervene, and where we were kind of going last year, was when council fails to act for a period of 60 days or more due to lack of quorum, the minister may declare all seats vacant. So that's when the minister can come in, or the ministry can come in and act at that point. But if council is not fulfilling its responsibilities under the vacancy rules, then we have no, we can't come in and do anything. Only the courts can intervene at that point, but somebody would have to challenge the municipality in court. We only come into play when there's lack of quorum.
Respectfully, though, you invoked the Municipal Affairs Act to issue an order.
We did,
and
because,
it happened sooner.
yeah, we couldn't intervene, or we intervened at that point because council was failing to act. So rather than declare all the seats vacant, the minister chose to order the municipality to work with a facilitator that we chose to fill that vacancy, because once you get to 9, once you're back to an odd number, if 4 people want to, continue to vacate and not come to meetings, then you still had a quorum. You potentially still could have a quorum with 5. So we intervened that way using the Municipal Affairs Act. But it wasn't until council chose not to, or some members refused to come to meetings, resulting in lack of quorum and getting to that 60 days.
Okay, so you come here and tell us to put different wording to address that. But on your part, what are you going to change to address it if it comes back again? Like, we paid the price for almost 2 years as a municipality and taxpayers. So is there any suggestion that you change the rules at your end so that you can intercede sooner?
What I can say is that this is, it's political will to change the municipal act. This definitely is something that the ministry is aware of, that could potentially happen again in any municipality. But I'll reiterate again that the municipal act puts the onus on council to fill that vacancy, not the ministry. So it's on council. And the way that the municipal act is written is that in that particular case, we couldn't intervene on that one particular issue. But definitely, I can assure you that we are aware of this, and there could, the municipal act, if the minister chose, there could potentially be some change, but I can't speak for the minister, or if there would ever be any change. But again, as I say, the onus is on council. So there are provisions under the municipal act. Brian talked a lot about Section 270 policies. Those are requirements of the municipality, and council is elected to make decisions of the municipality. It's on council to make those decisions.
And I would add that the ministry views its municipal partners as accountable forms of local government within their areas of jurisdiction. So you're accountable, mature forms of local government responsible to your electorate. And it's so you have to deal with your community. It's your community in part that has to do its part as well to keep you in line by taking you to task. And you're not doing what you should be doing.
I know, but if you look at what happened the last time, 4 against 4 was going nowhere. So how do you fix it without changing something at your level?
Well, you have fixed it in the sense that you now have a good, robust council vacancy policy that will assist you in moving forward should that occur again.
All right, I'll
Okay, thank you.
intervene too. Like, I think, you know, when it comes to municipal governments, we want to be independent, we want to be local, we want to have our own decision-making powers. And if the provincial government stepped in every time there was a minor kerfuffle between councils or this or that, we would be yelling that they were daddying us. And that's not what municipalities are all about. And I think from the ministry perspective, for there to be an intervention, it has to be a pretty serious occurrences that are going on. I don't think that we want a model of government where the province is stepping on our toes at every turn as well. And, you know, at the end of the day, each and every one of us has a responsibility when we sit at this table to make decisions in the best interest of the municipality. And by just putting it off as, oh, the ministry should have done this and that and the other thing, I think it has to be expected that there also was a lack of action on the people who were sitting at this table all the way around. So, you know, I don't want our ministry colleagues to feel like they're the ones under attack here, because very much so, when you talk to the people at AMO and you talk to the people at Roma, we talk about having our own decision-making powers and having that independence from the provincial government. We are run under their legislation, but we are our own people, and we have the responsibility. That's what we've been elected for. So, I have a specific policy question. When we go back to the council appointment policy, you recommended updating that. In the previous version of the procedural bylaw, there was a paragraph, although I think it was a little vague as to how those council appointments were done to our various boards and committees and our subcommittees under our committee of the whole. Is it the recommendation? So it had sat under our procedural bylaw at one point. Is the ministry's recommendation to have a separate standalone appointments policy, you know, to that really outlines what the process is for that appointment at the beginning of the term, and then how we change it?
Yeah, it's not necessary to do so. If you wish to do so, certainly you can include it all in one comprehensive procedural policy. That's fine.
Okay.
The example from Bracebridge is just given because it was a simple standalone policy. It was easy to find and dealt with a clear process.
Okay.
I'm not saying that that's the only process. I'm just saying that that's an example of a clear process that makes it clear who does what.
Okay. And that
and how it's
includes
done.
if we want to change those assignments midway through the term, does that included in the Bracebridge as well?
As I say, it just needs to be a consistent policy, which is clearly worded so people can understand who does it. And then, of course, as the last council had struggled with from time to time, you need to adhere to the policy you pass.
Mm-hmm. And then when you look at the harassment policy, which just follows that under 4.9, you know, it talks about not only expanding the training process, but making sure that those harassment policies apply also to members of council. You know, obviously when there is kind of an employment contract, so when you're dealing with workplace harassment within a staffing level, it's dealt with in one way. So then who becomes the arbitrator if it is an issue between council and staff?
Well, that can be, I've seen different municipalities deal with it in a number of different ways. One of which is that if it is a senior member of staff who is reporting to council that is complaining of harassment, so that would be any of your officers, which would be your CEO, clerk treasurer, or any other, or your bylaw, or your building official, any of the officers of the municipality. That they audit that harassment complaint automatically goes to an identified third party, who then deals with managing it. Doesn't make decisions on behalf of council, to be clear.
Mhm.
They just take out of council's hands the management of it, so there's an independence given to that process, right? Because at the end of the day, it's still council's decision as to whether or not it's going to proceed with a recommendation, just like if I was in a private business and I had my staff who's reporting to me complain of harassment, whether I agree with that or not, it's my decision and I have to deal with the fallout if I make the wrong decision, right? Likewise, council is the head of the municipality, and council, if it's receiving a complaint from staff that reports to it, then there should be some independence to that process. But at the end of the day, it's council's going to make the decision, and council's going to have to decide and live with the consequences of whatever decision it makes, right? So that just allows an independence to the process. I've seen in a number of them. Others have identified that a subcommittee of council be struck from individuals who are not identified as part of the complaint process. It's another way of dealing with that, although that occasionally falls into the difficulty which you may have had with the last council, which was we're an even split. And obviously it's the side that agrees and the side that doesn't agree. And that creates a problem. Whereas if you have an independent external third party, there's perhaps a little more independence to the process, but that whatever process council establishes, you should try to protect the integrity of the complaint process. But obviously you can't have that at the end of the day fetter council's ability to make decisions on behalf of the municipality that council as a whole sees are the decisions that it wants to make and live with.
Okay, and then just one final question in relation to kind of the interconnectedness of social media policy with codes of conduct on both the board level and on that workplace harassment. So we have updated our social media policy, which was recently passed. I don't have the date, but it was in this term anyway, in the spring. I would suppose it's wise to then also have, whether it's the codes of conduct for ourselves or our boards and committees, as well as our workplace harassment policies, reference back to the social media policy, like for further kind of explanation on what that acceptable social media use looks like and what it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say firstly that this was a report done during the term of the last council and is reflective of things at a certain point in time. And I recognize that staff, both subject to immediately after our interview and thereafter, they started working on stuff and continued to work on stuff before they received our recommendations, and a lot of these changes have already been made. So, kudos to staff and what was going on with that. And kudos to this council for implementing a lot of that. With respect to the social media policy, one of the biggest problems that you have that I see not only in this last term of council, but I've seen in other councils, is the dissemination of half information, partial information, misleading information, even straight up misinformation, and the lack and staff wanting to be neutral and therefore not reacting, and council wanting to be neutral or sometimes unfortunately participating, and therefore the trolling behavior escalates. So if council comes out and if staff comes out and says, look, this is the information which came out on this social media post, it is inaccurate, here is the facts as they are, and council and staff provide that, I think that provides the advantage that protects the staff or council member who's affected by that trolling behavior. And if the trolling behavior continues and becomes a part of including emotional or mental distress, getting to the point of assisting that person, because it's very costly to go out and hire your own counsel to attack that. But then at the same time, if you don't hold those people to account, the behavior escalates, right? So I think that we want to look at what you're prepared to do to support staff and council members where people are spreading misinformation, not about them in their personal life. I don't care, If someone wants to spread information about me and, I do something evil on the weekend, fine. But I expect my employer to protect me if somebody says I'm doing my job wrong. Or, and in that case, or even that applies even in the case of an elected official, right? If someone's coming to me and saying you're doing something wrong, then you should be able to look to your organization to assist you in protecting yourself. And I think that's really what that's getting at, and they should all be integrated so that they have the same level. So yes, I would include reference to your social media policy to say that's what is acceptable. And as long as you're within that realm, then we're good. Once you're outside of that realm, then we're going to try to support and we're going to react. And we're going to do something in a timely fashion to ensure that that behavior de-escalates, or at least the correct information is out there to protect our council and our staff.
And sorry, if I can add to that as well, with the connecting them to, say, a code of conduct, a harassment policy, and even a staff code of conduct if you have one. The benefit of that then is that if you're linking behavior in a desired behavior in a code of conduct to say that behavior not following the social media policy is a violation of the code of conduct, then at least someone can complain to the integrity commissioner and an investigation can be conducted using your social media policy as the nature of the complaint. So linking them together would definitely be a good idea.
Ensures consistency across all the
Yep.
policies.
The only question I would have in relation to that and having, staff or communications branch supporting any member who felt that they were being, there was misinformation being spread about them is how do you send those messages out without kind of having council approve that message? So, if Councillor Joe feels this and I work with staff and Councillor Joe to put out a statement of fact, how do you, it should be a statement that is reflective of the views of council as a body. And so how do you have that responsive reaction while at the same time ensuring that all of our members not all, the majority of the members of council are on board with that statement being issued? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so there's one thing for staff or myself to put out a statement, but what if Councillor Rivard doesn't agree with, our view of the facts? Or, sorry, I picked you.
What I would say to that is that council should control the messaging that goes on out there. So establishing, if you don't have a good communication policy, establishing who can speak on behalf of the municipality. So if you establish that kind of policy and a council member is going outside of that policy and issuing their own statements, then you would look to that communication policy. And then typically it'd be a combination of maybe the head of council working with staff to develop the communication that goes out, and then they would release it out on social media that says, just want to clarify, this is the, you wouldn't say this is the real story, but, just want to clarify that on such a day, this resolution was passed and this decision was made. Any further questions, please come to the municipality, kind of thing. But if you had a good communication policy and procedure and process to restrict council members from misrepresenting or representing, saying things out there and having the public think that they're representing the municipality. So the communication should be approved and in accordance with that policy.
And you can also, within your policies, identify thresholds at which different types of behavior are responded to. So you could have information being spread on social media about, let's say, the operator of your public landfill getting into a tiff with somebody at the landfill. And you may say at that threshold, his manager should respond to that. And within so many days, right? Or you might say, once the person says, well, or if it goes far enough, you might say, well, wait a minute, we had to call the police on that, so it better be Jay that's going to respond to that, or even perhaps the head of council, but at each level, and then within the time frames, you can set all that out. I mean, there are examples of social media policies which address many of those issues, which are embedded for LaSalle and Middlesex, which do consider, responding to those type of things and how you might frame responses and timeline responses so that you meet both council's need to be able to have time to consider it and make a decision, but also the staff and council who are affected by that behavior's need to have that resolved and to feel defended if their behavior is appropriate by the organization.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Councillor Resto?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. I don't really have any specific questions. I just wanted to comment that it's kind of a unique situation because all of the work that's gone into this document and the reviews and all of the work that staff have done since we came into office is based on a completely different council. There's nobody here who was there back then. But I just wanted to share, I appreciate the report and I appreciate the recommendations. And I think you can see that there's good understanding and a good flow because we've done a lot of work already in revising a lot of the things that are in here. And I appreciate the mayor's comments saying that we'll leave staff some time to cross-reference some of those to make sure we're getting to all of them. But I think the work that's been done is a lot of what we see here. And it certainly makes a big difference to have a, kind of cohesive council that's working together and working on behalf of our residents and ratepayers. So just wanted to say thanks for being here tonight. You're walking through with us a lot of stuff that we only got to see on YouTube in the last couple of years. But good work's happening. Applaud staff for the work that's been done. I applaud the councillors who have been part of those discussions that we had to do some of the reviews to some of this work, and to everybody else on council who heard those presentations and accepted it and see that we have to move forward and there's things that we have to clean up in policies. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you for your presentation.
I want to say, sort of back at you in a sense with the kudos, because quite frankly, it would have been easy for this council to say, hey, we're a whole new council. We don't need to do anything. We're fine. We're working together. But it's better, to use this time when you are working together, you are working cohesively, you are working on a policy framework to put in place a good policy background that will perhaps help defray. And you can never, as I said before, you can give some people all the training in the world. It's not going to change their behavior, but at least you could defray perhaps some of it and give people an out to release some of the pressure, which might result in a council member not leaving, keeping you in a position where you can continue to move council business forward, which might leave you in a position where staff feels protected enough by good, robust social media and harassment policies to continue to work cooperatively, even with a difficult council.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Jamie. And I agree. We don't. We're very fortunate. So far, we've been at it together for 9 months, and I really enjoy the relationship that we're building day by day as a council. And I think it makes a huge difference. But policy is a fantastic thing. We definitely will look through and make some of those changes. And yes, we do appreciate not just the work in the report, but we know that our municipality kept you busy during the last term, and I thank you for all the work. The sitting up late nights and watching the council meetings and all that stuff, because I know we put a lot of extra work on the regional office during the last term. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll just let Kathy have some closing remarks, I think.
Yeah, so I just have, there's just the one slide that I'm doing on the next steps. So we presented the report. So the municipality from here should review your existing bylaws with respect to the implementation of any changes you may want to make after consideration of the report. And then also determine whether any new or updated policies are needed, bylaws are needed, or any other implementation methods would be appropriate for each of the recommendations. Sarah is your municipal advisor. Sarah will be working, she'll be keeping in touch with the municipality to, kind of see how you're progressing. She's available if you need, if you want somebody to, look up some policies and say, hey, what are you seeing out there? Because we are talking to not just the 110 in the Northeast, but we have an in to the other, 334 across the province, because we work very closely with the other 4 municipal services offices, and they're also staff in our other regional offices are familiar with policies that other municipalities have. So we have an in to all of the rest of them as well. So again, reach out to Sarah if you want to know what we're seeing out there, and if there's any other examples, we'd be more than happy to provide them with you. And we're also available any other education training that we're able to provide. Always willing to come out and provide that for you. And last but not least, a lot of what we provided and a lot of changes that you may want to make, we can't go without saying that you may want to obtain legal opinion on certain things to ensure that you are, complying with legislation and that sort of thing. So or other professional advice, right? So you might be looking at making changes to your code of conduct. Well, have a conversation with your integrity commissioner. About potential changes and how you could word certain things in your code of conduct, that sort of thing. So again, we're here to help. If you wouldn't mind keeping Sarah up to date on your progress, greatly appreciated. And if you need us back out here, we're more than happy to come visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I'd just like to thank Kathy Horgan, Brian Searle, and Sarah Cormier for being here with us this evening. Again, for all the work that you've done on behalf of our municipality. We really appreciate the support, and please pass on our regards and say hello to your new minister for us. We look forward to meeting him the next go round, maybe at Roma. So thank you again very much for coming this evening.
Thank you.
It is moved by Councillor Tessier and seconded by Councillor Restoul. It resolved that bylaw number 2023-75, being a bylaw of the West Nipissing Municipality to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held on the 7th day of September 2023, shall come into force and take effect on the day it is passed.
All in favor? Carried.
It is moved by Councillor St. Louis and seconded by Councillor Courchaine. Be it resolved that the meeting of council held on September the 7th, 2023, be adjourned.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you again very much, councillors, for coming up tonight.